Welcome all. We'll be talking about how to make a pull request using only the GitHub interface. This can be really useful if as a carpentries instructor so that you can help contribute to the carpentries lessons. And it is in fact kind of a useful skill if you're doing the checkout requirements. You can also make issues, but this will specifically demo a pull request. One of the things I love most about the Carpentries community is that we work together to make these lessons. And so I love that we can all contribute to these lessons. However, that using GitHub is sometimes a bit of a barrier for folks who are not as familiar with Git and GitHub. And so this lesson, this demo will hopefully get people a little bit more familiar with how you can use the GitHub interface, know Git, and use the GitHub interface to create a contribution to the lesson where you're directly suggesting a change to the lessons. All right, I often find myself making contributions to the lessons when I prep to teach. Otherwise, I usually forget. Usually that means that the changes that I've suggested aren't actually in the lessons that I've taught, but I like to include them so that it's better for someone else in the future or myself when I go to teach it again. And so usually I find myself making pull requests and issues when I'm preparing to teach the lesson as I find things that I notice need to be improved. Okay, I'm gonna start my screen share here. All right. So I actually found these issues to work on, the things that we're working on, from this help wanted page that the Carpentries has. So if you're looking for a place to contribute, this can be a really good place to go. They have labels such as good first issue that are things that are supposed to be a little easier for people who are getting started using GitHub to actually fix. And so you can find a list of some of the issues that maintainers have marked as good first issues and help wanted here. I put the link to that also in the links for this this session. So if you want to find it there, it's in the help wanted issues link. So I went through and I looked for a few of these and I found a couple. So I'm probably going to do this demonstration twice. The first one I found was this one for the Novice Gap Minder lesson. And the issue said that they wanted to remove this tip about avoiding duplication because symbolic links can get really messy for people, and they thought it should be removed. The maintainer agreed that that's a good idea to remove it. And so I'm going to suggest it. And if they decide not to do it, they can cancel my pull request. This is really going to be a suggestion to them. And so there's no harm in me suggesting it. The maintainers can themselves decide if they want to include it. But so we have this issue 768, which is what I'm going to go ahead and fix. All right, and so I'm going to open another copy so I can keep this issue up. And I'm going to right click on the code button here and open it in a new tab. The other option is to right click on this Novice Gap Minder. Both will take me to the folder or repository that holds this lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and open it in a new tab here. And this is the folder, the main page that holds the lesson. Another bit that's a little bit of a hurdle in getting to be able to make contributions to the lesson is that when you first look at this repository, it has a bunch of files and folders that have names that may mean nothing to you if you're not familiar with the lesson template or how to make websites using Jekyll. There is actually a lesson on how to make websites using Jekyll that is part of the Carpentries material. And the lesson is the Carpentries is continuing to try and make it a little easier to use the lesson piece of information, the lesson folders here, the lesson repositories, so that people can contribute a little bit more easily. So actually, they recently released the new workbench, which is the new lesson infrastructure and development. You can find the link on line 44 of the Etherpad to learn more about where that is and what's going on there. But for a little orientation to this lesson, some of the major things that I pay attention to when I go to a repository is one, this link right here. This is the link to the rendered, the pretty front end version that when we teach from, we're used to seeing. So if I right click and open that up, you can see that it has all the episodes of things that are typically taught in this Novice Gap Minder software carpentry lesson. So that's usually linked here in the about of the repository so that you can find it. And so if you need to look at the rendered version, what it currently looks like, this is a good place to open it up. I like to open it in a new tab because I often want to switch back and forth between what it looks like now and the back end, this repository that I'm editing. Okay, the other big thing that I spend a lot of time looking at are the episodes. And so in this particular lesson, there's an episodes RMD because they're writing it in R, and so they're using the RMD structure. In most lessons that don't use R, it'll just be an episodes folder that's using plain Markdown. But in this case, they're using the episodes RMD folder instead. And so when I click on this episodes folder, I see what looks kind of similar to that list of different episodes that were on the main page. So this is where all of the episodes of the lesson live on the back end. It's the same as kind of looking at the schedule here on the front page where each of the episodes is listed here. These have more like useful descriptive title names, whereas the files themselves might have a little bit different naming structure here. All right, so here is where I want to make an edit to the lesson. So if I go back to my particular issue that I'm looking at here, we're removing an issue about sim linking. It says it's in lesson 2. I think they mean episode 2 there. And so let's go look at episode 2 of this lesson. So I think that's probably this one. And I want to scroll through and see if I can find where that tip is. Here it is. So line 144, there's the tip avoiding duplication. And so this is the box that I want to remove. It's on the lesson. It's a box that's a call out, which has a little pin in it. Let's look at it, what it looks like on the other side. So if we go to the rendered version here, project management with RStudio, and we scroll down, we should see a yellow box. Yeah, this is what it looks like actually rendered, this little tip. And so this is what we're going to be suggesting they remove from this lesson. All right. Back in our repository side, so back in the back end here, I found where it is. So I know this is the right file. I'm going to scroll back up. Sorry for a lot of scrolling. It was a little bit far down. And so here is where I'm going to use this little edit button. It's kind of hidden, but it's a little pencil icon. If you hover over it, it says you can edit it. And so when I figured out what I want to change and that I'm in the right file, I'm going to go ahead and click on this little edit button here. I think of it as the edit button. It's showing a pencil, so maybe I should call it the pencil button. But when I say edit button, this is what I'm referring to. And so when I click this button, it actually makes myself a copy of the lesson that I can use. And you can see it gives me a message here at the top. It says, hey, you don't have write access to, so I can't directly change the files in here because I'm a regular Carpentries member. I'm not the maintainer for this lesson. And so it says, we've created a fork for you to commit your proposed changes to. Submitting a change will write it to that new branch in your fork, and so you can submit a pull request. So that's a little bit of Git jargon there, but what it's telling me is that it made a copy of it that I can edit, and then I can suggest back a change to the existing lesson with what's called a pull request. So that's requesting that they bring the changes, pull the changes in that I have created. Okay, now once I've clicked the edited button, it's created this text editor in the browser here where I can edit the file. Trisha says, can I show the fork too? I will show the fork. You can't really see it until I actually make the change though. So I will make that change first. Okay, and so I'm in the text editor. And you can see that there's kind of two scrolling windows here. There's the one that has all the text in it, and then there's the outer one here that's like the whole GitHub page. So my text editor scrolls as well as the page scrolls here. And so I need to scroll down in my text editor to find that tip that I wanted to remove. It's the second tip, so it's right here. And so here I can actually make the change. And so I'll go in, I'm going to delete this whole section here. And I'm removing that section. That is the change here. You might find yourself asking, like, what if I wanted to add something? How do I know what this formatting means? So some of the formatting in here is usually Markdown formatting. So if you search for cheat sheets on Markdown, it can be really helpful. This is specifying that this third level heading because it has 3 hashtags, and this is a a heading for the page. Some of it is specific to the template. So for example, this is a challenge block. So it's a block that is an exercise for learners to work on. And it has very specific formatting with these little greater than signs for the block. And then at the end, it says challenge. So it knows how to format it differently from some of the other blocks. And so if you're like, I wanted to add a call out, I wanted to add a solution or a challenge, the place I like to go for that is the lesson example. And so that's actually linked on line 30 or 43 here of the Etherpad, the lesson template example. And I actually have it up on my screen here. So if I go to this one, this is actually a lesson. So it looks like a lesson, but it's a lesson that's about how to format the lessons. So it's a little bit recursive there. And so, for example, if this formatting episode is the one I often look at. And so it has information about how to format things, including a whole section at the bottom about special block quotes, which are these special sections that we're talking about. So this is showing how to format one of those call outs that we just removed, how the formatting works. And then if you want other types of blocks, they're in here as well. So a lot of useful information in this lesson example page. If you're thinking like, how do I get a prerequisite box, or how do I format the markdown? There's a whole nother episode on markdown. So this can be a good place to go. Okay, we went on a little aside there talking about formatting, but I've removed this section here that we wanted to remove. And now I need to basically save it in this Git repository, save it in my copy of the folder. And so down here at the bottom of the page, and see I'm scrolling in the page, not in the text editor now, there's this box at the bottom that says propose changes. And it has a default message here, but I want to give it a more descriptive message when I go to save it. So I'm going to say, making change from issue number, and then I'm going to go and look at the issue number. It's 768. And then in the optional description, I'll add a little more saying removing tip about sim linking. Okay. If I had write permissions, if I was an owner on this repository, it might have a couple options here. I could directly submit this and save it to the repository, or I could make a branch and suggest it. I don't get a choice here because I don't have the permissions to write directly to this. But if you directly have permissions to write to something and you still want somebody to review it, which is oftentimes the way I work, I want somebody to review my changes. And so then I'll often click the option to make a fork and pull request in any case, instead of submitting it directly. I think we'll see that on the next example I have, because I have permissions to write on that. And so this one is correct, is fine. So I want to go ahead and save it. In this case, it's called, in Git, it's called a commit. And so I'm going to click this propose changes button. And here it gives me to the next page. And so it's showing me that this in my comparison. So this is still the next step in suggesting it. I've made the change. Now I have to officially suggest it to this repository. And so here it shows that it's comparing the main branch that are of the original one. So this is the original repository, and it's comparing my version of it. So it shows now with my username here, and then it created a special branch called patch one. So this is the place where I made those changes. This is my copy of it where I made the suggested changes, that it's on this side, and I'm suggesting it to the repository that the Carpentries has. And if I scroll down, it says I can review it. So I can see what I changed in this difference format here, this diff here. And so I can see that I removed all of these lines, and that's the change I made. If there were more files, it would show more preview of what I've changed. All right, so the next thing I need to actually do on this page is go ahead and click this create pull request button. So this is actually going to suggest the change to the Carpentries, and it takes me to yet another page to do so. Here it fills in with a title and a little bit of more information, and that's coming from the information I put in when I saved it, when I did the commit. And then it has this common things that the Carpentries has that you can read about when you make a contribution. It says like, if it's a contribution for instructor training, do this. And reminder that then maintainers are volunteers, so they may not respond right away. And so that isn't needed for my individual pull request. And so I'll go ahead and remove it. It's good to read in case this is my first time submitting a pull request, but I've read it a few times. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it. And I like to make sure that this box here, allow edits by maintainers, is checked. So that way, if the maintainers need to make a small change, they don't have to wait on me making that small change before they can actually use my suggestion. So I always allow edits by maintainers here. And you can see a little bit more here. It again shows that diff of the files I change. And this is the kind of saving message that we created, the commit. And I can, this time when I click the create pull request button, it will actually submit the pull request and I'll be done with this process for the most part until someone reviews it. And so now I've created a pull request. I'm in the pull request tab for this lesson that I've been working on. And so here you can see my initial comment, the title, and it's like running some checks on it, that the automation that the Carpentries has set up. And here the maintainers can come in and look at it. They can review the files I changed by looking at that same diff in this files changed tab that's right here. So you can click here and they can review it and give feedback on it. They can make inline comments on like, oh, I actually think we should keep this line or things like that. And so this is me, I've submitted it. Now it's up to the people who are there to review it and decide if they want to merge it. Sometimes there'll be a conversation that goes on back and forth about things that are included in this, but otherwise eventually they'll merge it or decide that they don't want to keep that change. One thing I'm going to add to this before I go on actually is another comment, because I mentioned issue 768 in the commit message, but it'll actually reference it a little bit better if I put it in the text here. So I'm going to say that this fixes issue, I'll say fixes number 768. You can see it already kind of recognizes it when I start to type in the pound sign and the issue. And I'm going to go ahead and add that comment in. This links together my pull request and that issue. So actually when my issue gets merged, it's going to automatically, or sorry, when my pull request gets merged, when they take my suggestion, it will go ahead and close that issue on the repository so that it's not there anymore and people know that it's finished. All right, that's my first example. Oh, Trisha asked me to show the fork. And so right now I'm actually looking at the repository for software carpentry, their original one, but I can actually see my copy of this, my fork, if I click on this button here that says my username. And so this is my copy of it. And this is in fact the copy of it that has my suggestion in it. I also have access to all the other copies of it that the original repository did. But this is my copy of that particular suggestion. So if I went and looked at my episodes RMD here, it would be missing that change I made because this has my change in it. And you can see up in the upper right-hand corner that I'm in my copy of it because it shows my username and then the name of the repository. And it actually says where it came from. It said this was copied from the software carpentry, our Novice Gap Minder folder or repository. All right. Questions, things you want to add in chat about this? I'll do a quicker version of this and do it again in a second, but what are your questions? Anything you'd like to add from the folks who have done this before?
Sarah, can you mention why there is another issue number appended to the one at the top there, 772?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it does look kind of funny because I have the issue number that existed here, and then it has this next number next to it. So every issue and every pull request gets a number so that you can reference it by that number. And so it's actually my pull request is number 772, and the numbers compound between the issues and pull requests. So there's not like a 772 issue and a 772 pull request. Each issue and each pull request continues to add on that number. And so this is the number for my pull request if someone wants to reference it in another place. And this is the number, me referencing the issue that I got this from. And actually, if we look back at the issue that I started at, this one, we'll notice that it actually has some references at the bottom from me mentioning the issue name. I said from my commit, it actually recognized that I wrote a #768 in the commit in this little notification here. And then when I mentioned it again in my chat, when I said this fixes it, it added this extra thing there. So I could make sure that it linked to the pull request from this one. So you can kind of see that they're linked together. Did I
Thanks
answer
for
that?
this demo. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to confirm with John that I answered the number question okay.
Yep, thanks very much.
All right, Jameen, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for this demo, Sarah. I wanted to ask, so when I've done this, I have tended to fork first and then work in my fork to create the pull request. If it was I guess the question really is, are there advantages to doing it one way or the other?
Yeah, I think it's fine either way. If you've already got the fork, I think it'll take you to your fork when you go ahead and click that edit button and you don't have permissions. And so mostly I skipped the official copy step because it'll do the copy for you, or it'll take you to your fork for you if you already have a fork as well. So one advantage could be if your fork is out of date. So if you've edited or if you've had your fork for a long time, you've had your copy, it doesn't automatically get updated with the changes that are made in the repository, in the main repository, in the what's called upstream repository. So in this one, so say they go on and make a bunch of changes to this R Novice Gap Minder, my fork is actually going to fall behind. It's not going to have those latest changes. And so if I don't want to use command line to update my fork, I can actually go to this one and click edit and it'll give me a latest version of it. So that is only downside I can think of not clicking directly, is that you might have an old version of the repository if you forked it a long time ago. Otherwise, I think it's pretty equal. I'm sort of used to the clicking on it because you don't actually need a separate fork if you have write access to make a pull request. This kind of gets into the Git stuff a little bit more, but if I have the permission to write to this repository, I don't need my own fork. I can do it in branches instead. So my own copies within this repository. If branches aren't something you know from GitHub, please just ignore what I said. But for those who are familiar with Git, I can also make direct branch pull requests instead of having a fork myself. Has its pros and cons too. Other questions, suggestions, thoughts?
So it's Chris. The proposed changes, that's like equivalent to a commit, you said. And then the create pull request green little icon. What is that? Is it like a push?
It's not exactly, it is specifically the pull request part. So if I hadn't done that part, my branch would have that change in it. So I would have my fork and my branch with that change in it, but I wouldn't have this pull request here in the queue of pull requests. So it's actually the part that makes the pull request in GitHub is when I clicked those pull buttons about making a pull request. That stuff wouldn't have happened. I still would have had the saved change. I would have a version of the repository with that section deleted, but I wouldn't have yet suggested it to the Carpentries repository until I go through those pull request buttons.
Okay, cool.
So you can make the changes and then not suggest them as well. And in fact, you can build up a history of changes in your copy in a particular branch and then suggest them all at once to the repository, make one pull request with them in it. I don't usually recommend that unless the changes are very linked together. It's better to have one pull request per change that you're suggesting, because that gives the maintainers who are working on or maintaining and keeping track and merging these pull requests the opportunity to kind of merge one and not the other. So if you're merging not linked changes, they might be like, oh, this is really great, and this needs a little bit of work. And if they're in the same pull request, you'll have to do that work before they can merge it. If they're in separate ones, they can go ahead and bring in your changes from the one thing that they agree on and spend some time talking with you about what the other changes are or deciding what to do to improve it.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to do this process once more because I pulled up two and I actually even wrote some messages in it. And this one's going to look slightly different because I am a maintainer on the Jekyll Novice Pages lesson. This is actually the lesson I mentioned where you can learn how to make websites with Jekyll Pages. And this episode is actually about GitHub commit messages. So it's about writing a good message when you write things. I actually wrote a pretty good one in my pull when I made that suggested change before. And so I went ahead and actually wrote myself some text that I'm going to put into the lesson. So this one, let me open the repository for it so that I have it open. And so again, this one it's not written in R. So actually all the episodes are in the episodes folder, which is a little bit more typical than the R Markdown ones. All right, and then I need to figure out which lesson it actually is. And you can see these aren't numbered. It's using a different way to tell what the order is. There's a file in the configuration that tells it which order these are in. So it's a little harder to guess which one I need to edit. But let me take a look at the lesson. I told myself which lesson it was, I think. Oh yes, I said I was going to put it in the Markdown episode. And so I'll double check from go back to the repository here, open up the version of it, the rendered version, and we'll go ahead and go to I think it's this authoring with Markdown one. And I'm going to scroll down, just double check. Yeah, here's the call out that I'm going to be fixing. Interestingly enough, both of my things I found had something to do with these little call out boxes. They don't have to, of course. That's just a coincidence that I chose two that had to do with call outs. All right, so I know I need this writing a commit message box is what I'm going to update. And it is in the Markdown episode. And I can also tell what the name of that file is by looking at the URL here. So this between the repository name or the folder name and the like index.html, which is kind of a default name for the landing pages of things. This here name is actually what the name of that episode is in the file form. And so if I go back here and go to episodes, I can look for the one that says Markdown. So this is the file. This is the episode that I want to change. And I'm going to go ahead and click edit. And then I need to scroll down to where my commit message one is. And I'm going to go back to my cheat here. And I wrote what I wanted to write here. I'm actually going to edit it because I actually wrote it in the form that it needs to go in this block quote with these little greater than signs. I won't edit it. I just needed to copy that. I think I copied it. Let me double check. Okay. And so then I'll go back to my writing here and I need to change these lines here. So I'm going to paste in my new section that talks a little bit more about pull requests. I'm actually going to edit it a little bit because this line is a little bit long. So I'm going to make a new line. Conveniently, because I'm in the block quote, it actually already gave me a new line with the block quote at the beginning of it when I pressed enter there. Okay, so I'm editing this call out, adding a little bit more text, but even though I'm a maintainer on this, I would like somebody to review it. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the main page here, and I'm going to write added more description on commit best practices. And I think that's a pretty good message. I should say that this is fixes issue number. Let's go back and look at it. It's 262. The issue numbers are also in the URL. So if you're not in the right part of the page, you can find it in the URL. So it fixes issue 262. That's the right one. And you can see here, because I'm a maintainer, I have the option to commit directly to GH Pages branch, which is Git speak for saying I can make this change directly. And if I clicked commit changes right now, it would go ahead and update the page. But I don't want to do that. I want one of my fellow maintainers to review these changes and make sure that they're happy with them before they get merged, before they get included in the actual lesson. And so I'm going to click this create a new branch button here. And this happened automatically last time. It made that patch 1 branch for me because I did not have write permissions, but here I do have write permissions to it. And I can change I like to make the branch name match the issue that I'm fixing. So I'll say that this is going to be issue 262. And then I'll go ahead and propose changes. And again, I can remove all this extra stuff in here that they put in. And I'm going to leave. I could write more here if I wanted to, but I'm actually pretty happy with my messages. So I'll click the create pull request button. And now I have a pull request. This one, again, this is kind of slightly different because I have write access. I made a direct change. It didn't quite make the same copy, but it is a change that someone can review before it actually gets incorporated into the lesson. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts about this practice of working in GitHub?
So Sarah, do you know, because that's yours, do you have to set up who the reviewers are in advance?
At any time you can request a reviewer. Let me go back to my screen share. And by default, the people that can review a pull request that's put in are people who have worked with the lesson in the past or who have write permissions. I know the people who have write permissions. I think it'll also let you request a reviewer from somebody who's contributed to the lesson before as well. So even if they're not a maintainer, if they don't have write permissions to the lesson. And you can request a reviewer up here. I actually know that Julian's not working on this anymore. So I'm gonna, I'll ask Toby to review my pull request. And actually there were 2 people that commented on that one. So I'll ask Toby and Alex to review my pull request. And they'll now get notified that I submitted this and that they can review it. And one of them will probably merge it unless they find any big changes. Although they can make edits to this. So if they wanted to, they could. They'll probably just ask me to make those edits though. One question that I thought of is actually like, why use the web interface versus the command line if you know both? I often use the web interface for like smaller changes, like adding a couple lines, deleting a couple lines. If there are bigger changes that I want to suggest, like I think we need to rearrange this whole lesson or rearrange things within an episode, or this is something that takes place across the whole lesson in a bunch of episodes. Those are things that I might work on my local using like Git, I know, and using my local computer instead of using the web interface. So if you know both, that's kind of my decision-making process. If it's something that I think is pretty easy to do in the web interface, I'll do it there. If it's more complicated and I want to be able to use my text editor and like that's a little nicer, then I'll do it on my local computer. That's where knowing more Git can be helpful. So Carpentries also teaches Git, so you can also learn it by coming to some of the Carpentries workshops. And I love teaching Git. It's one of my favorites. I think for me, because I didn't know Git when I helped with my very first workshop. I knew Python and the Unix shell, which were the other 2 things that were taught. And I had tried to learn Git on my own and found it really frustrating. And I was like, how is this different from like a Google Drive? And how is this different? I don't understand what's going on here. And then when I saw it in the workshop, it sort of clicked more for me. I was like, oh, this is how commonly this is used. And these are the major things. And so it kind of made more sense to me and kind of changed a lot of my workflows once I learned how to use Git. Comments, questions, other things about using the GitHub web interface? I'll say that they're always making it better. Like this ability to edit in the GitHub interface, I don't think it existed like 3 years ago. So it's fairly newish. So it's not, and they're continuing to add more features to working in the GitHub web interface to continue to do things like this. And there are probably features that I don't know about as well. So I'm always discovering features. I think that little edit button is kind of hidden, in fact. And so like, I think it's hard to notice sometimes or know what it does when you actually click that button. And so I'm sure there are other features that I haven't noticed as well.